This year, we're sponsors of the event, and I presume that is the only reason that I've been allowed to include the word compliance in the title of my talk. Usually it has the effect of getting everybody in the room to reach for their iPhones. But this subject is one that does have interest. It's a bit of a niche area, tanker operation mainly, but also gas. And it does go to the heart of what we at the P&I Clubs do for our cargo work, and doesn't really receive as much coverage as it should. Let me get the wrong way. Okay. Co-mingling, sometimes referred to as blending. Often the terms are mixed up, if you don't mind the pun. Let's get our ducks in a row about what we're talking about in the SOLAS context. What we're not talking about is the legal term of co-mingling, which, as you can see, refers to a financial situation where maybe I've given my money to somebody in a professional context, a lawyer, an accountant, or a banker, and they've mixed it all up with other people's money, and so nobody can really work out whose money is whose. Does that sound familiar? Yes. Or the other possibility, data commingling, files that are located on the same database, they end up with a contamination across them. We're not talking about that. Or in blending, this is something that often comes to mind when you hear that word, certainly in my case, with my Scottish ancestry. Or even the best way of producing your favourite cocktail, whether it's shaken or stirred. We're talking about mixing bulk oil cargoes in a tanker context. Commingling, what does it mean actually in our context? Well, we're talking about numerous parcels, multiple parcels of same spec cargo being loaded from different suppliers into the same hold or tank without segregation. The intention is to deliver that cargo to many receivers under separate bills of lading. The carrier, it basically carries and delivers the cargo, nothing else. But cargo from the same supplier, even if it's loaded from a separate source, ashore doesn't count as commingling. Blending, slightly different, and it's important to know the difference. Blending is the word that the regulation in SOLAS that's been amended, that's the word that's used in that. We're talking about loading different specification samples, but they come from the same supplier and they're loaded into the same cargo space. And these parcels are therefore mixed on board the ship. The objective is therefore to produce a cargo that is different in specification from any of the parcels that it's made up of. And it could be for making a new cargo, dyeing, doping with additives or something for a specific purpose. One of the ways that that's done is called load line blending, where you might have X cargo from tank A, Y cargo from tank B, and Z cargo from tank C, and they're all loaded together through the load line into the ship. As you can imagine, you can't really guarantee what the product will be that's gone on your ship. SOLAS, looking at that regulation change, May 2012 there were amendments made to the carriage of cargoes for oil and fuels chapter. Regulation 5.2 in effect came into force this year. It does two things. It prohibits the blending of bulk oil liquid during the sea voyage, and it specifically prohibits the production of processes taking place on board the ships. I've got the full rubric if you want it, but not for reproduction here, really. Sorry. Compliance checks. Thank you, Francis. Sorry. Going through these. What, when, and where will the blending take place are crucial elements. Each port state or port authority defines where and in what circumstances the blending can legitimately occur in their area. So you should be checking with your local or the local port authority for the designated location. You might get a situation, for example, where blending is not allowed to take place at the anchorage, but it is allowed within the port area mainly because the spill response is not available at the anchorage, but it would be, say, in the port. And it's easier to monitor what is going on in the port than it is on the open sea or in the anchorage. You've got to check with your flag state. Type and configuration of ship is also important, and some ships are not equipped to perform this task in the right way. And also at the clubs we see a fair amount of queries as well. Normally members are interested in finding out whether they're covered for specific operations. And it is something we're seeing more and more of as the trade is doing it more and more. It goes without saying that there's got to be adherence to the MARPOL requirements for filling out your oil record books. Looking at the cover side of things, from the club's point of view, pollution is one of the major risks that we're concerned about. The more you move cargoes around in ships, the more likely you are really to come across issues where you have a pollution or a leak or something like that. The IMO has therefore decided to introduce this regulation to stop the practice of the open seas where it can be less easily monitored. Port blending also brings with it pollution risks, but as I've said before, this is something that is dealt with more easily by the port authorities. Cargo claims is more prevalent. It's a more complex area really. Not so common, but they do occur. We have load line, as I mentioned, load line blending. That doesn't guarantee you've got a uniform blend of product in your ship. So why is that a problem? Well, you then look at the possibility of misdescription. And if you've misdescribed the cargo that's on your ship, you run the risk of arriving at the discharge port and having the receiver reject the cargo on the basis that he hasn't got what he's contracted for, and you can end up with arrests and all the consequences that brings with it. So co-mingling is done on the ship. It can even be done by discharging ashore some product, and backloading more products. So even if you're in port, you can have a situation where you don't really necessarily know what you've got on board. And so you can get from co-mingling, you can get the risk of cargo claims from misdescription as well. So operators have to appreciate, ultimately, that co-mingling and blending they fall outside the scope of the carrier's obligations to care for the cargo that's required by the usual cargo conventions. Well, charterers' orders, though. Yes, I mentioned misdescription. Often this can happen without the carrier actually realizing that they've misdescribed the cargo. The cargo description, however, has to match what's inside his tanks on the bill of lading. And a lawyer I spoke to recently described this as a minefield for owners. So we encourage our members to deal with the situation in advance if they can. And when the orders are received from the charterer, what would happen? Let's say if we had in the charter party a provision allowing the operation. There's no provision that allowed the operation. My first response would be, well, refuse that order if you can. Deal with that later if you like. If there is a co-mingling clause in the charter party and it permits co-mingling, then you have to look to comply with that order if it's lawful. So you have to verify that it is a lawful order that you can comply with. In practice, if the charter party doesn't expressly permit co-mingling, and most of them do nowadays, the charter will actually then request that the owner agrees to do it in return for an LOI. And this is clearly a commercial decision that the owners have to take on their own. Obviously, we appreciate there is commercial pressure from your trader or charterer to do so, particularly the way the market currently is. But if you've got a pre-agreed clause, the main thing you want to do is describe on the bill of lading what's happened. So cargo A, parcel A loaded at a location on such and such a date, co-mingled with parcel B loaded at such and such a location on such and such a date. Clearly stated on the bill of lading. But that doesn't work if the bills of lading have already been issued. So what, unfortunately, unless the bills can be cancelled and reissued, P&I doesn't cover that situation because you've contaminated knowing what you were doing and deliberately mixed cargo and issued bills that don't properly describe it. And so the owner is then left to rely on the charter party indemnity under the co-mingling clause or possibly the LOI that he's got in his hands. But I wouldn't be a club person, would I, unless I issued a good old caution. So easy to say, just take an LOI, but it's a risky approach. If the bills aren't appropriately claused, the letter may be unenforceable for legal reasons. Clean bills of lading have been issued. They don't reflect the provenance of the cargo, the date of the loading, and if there's been commingling or blending on board, do you have on the bill of lading the provenance of those individual parcels? Unless you've put that on, that they do risk being falling afoul of misdescription allegations. And an LOI in those circumstances would probably not be enforceable. So you'd be left as an owner without club cover and potentially without recourse under the indemnity. It's not all bad news, because we doubt very much the first-class charterer or oil major would contest payment under an LOI if asked to do so. But once they have the argument, whether they run it or not would be up to them. And I suspect there are many traders who would run the argument just to see what they could do with it. Charterparty clauses, just a quick look at those. I mean, there's not much to say about them specifically here, and we probably haven't got the time to do so. But what I would say, a good clause will provide you as an owner with a clear indemnity for any resultant claims, and it will be issued by a charterer that will pay up if it's required to do so. I put Intertanko on there because they've got a very good template clause that you can use in your charter parties, but the rest are people who probably would pay up. It all makes a difference, because if the charter doesn't pay, as we said, you may well not have recourse. Just a quick example, really, to close. There was a case last year where we had a ship that was on charter to a well-known trader, and it was asked, the charterer, was involved in the trade of blending and selling fuel oils, and he would take in fuel oil and other oils and blend them effectively on board the ships. What he would do, he would carry out a chemical analysis and blend until he got the cargo onto the specification he wanted. And in the case we had, it was sulfur, high sulfur fuel oil. He was taking low sulfur to balance it out to get the right specification. Unfortunately, something went wrong, and it's been investigated, and even the scientists don't know why, but the blend didn't match, and he ended up with tank top having about half a metre worth of asphalt at the surface, and he had to burn it out, drill it out with pneumatic drills, consequent delays and so on and so forth, and it was quite a serious problem. In that case, the trader did pay up under the LOI, but there was, as you can imagine, quite a considerable legal battle before that happened. Thank you. Any questions? I'll be sitting down.